Hello, everybody. My name is Emil Chuck. I am the Director of Admissions and Recruiting at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science. And along with co-authors Rosa Chaviana Moran and Arminio Perez, I'm doing this recording of some data that we are presenting as part of two papers that were published within the last year, focusing on unintended bias during admission screening in the admissions process in a manner that helps us analyze progress for holistic review. So our presentation here, as well as our two papers, uses methods of descriptive statistics to identify potential sources of unintended bias during the selection process of candidates, in which that process uses holistic review principles. The data that we are using here in this presentation and in our papers comes from the ADEA AADSAS data 2018 for Rutgers University School of Dental Medicine, with a focus on looking at applicant outcomes, such as invite to interview, as well as extending an offer for admission, and looking at specific cohorts, such as underrepresented minorities, socioeconomically disadvantaged applicants, as well as non-traditional applicants, such as post-baccalaureate students and those pursuing graduate degrees prior to starting dental school. So this slide was inspired by a similar slide done a number of years ago at a different national NAAHP meeting, where Bob Wurzburg from Boston University showed some interesting data about the selection process by grade point average at Boston University School of Medicine. And he opined the fact that we are not as holistic as we would like to be. I would kind of agree in a certain way if you look at it in one manner or another. It is certainly very important that academics do play a role in the selection process of candidates we want to interview. But I also point out a comparison of the cohorts indicated by all and denied interview in this slide. And what's remarkable is that the ranges you see of the overall GPAs are fairly similar to each other. So this actually suggests that processes that you would normally expect where there is a cutoff of expectation for undergraduate or overall GPA in this sense, doesn't seem to come into play so much. So if you are denied interview in this process, it's not because you didn't score high enough in your grade point averages in this set of data. So it is true that academics is important to be interviewed and often given an offer of admission, but this process actually suggests that you're not excluded solely for that basis. So if anything, this slide really does suggest that holistic review is in play when it comes to reviewing all the candidates for consideration for interview. That being said, this is a slide from the same set of data where we pull out just those applicants who have post-baccalaureate coursework. And one of the things that is very striking from these data is when you compare all applicants' overall GPA with the overall GPA of post-baccalaureate applicants, what you wind up seeing is that the post-baccalaureate applicant group tends to, as a group themselves, show a dramatic shift lower in their overall GPAs. This in contrast, if you looked at their post-baccalaureate specific GPA, which you're able to do in ADEA AADSAS, you're going to see that the post-bac GPA is actually much higher in range and actually quite competitive if you were just to analyze an applicant based on their post-baccalaureate GPA. Unfortunately, as you'll see from the fourth and the fifth columns, those applicants that are denied an opportunity to interview who happen to be post-baccalaureates seem to persist in having a low overall GPA. And you see that dramatic shift highlighted by the arrow that shows, that could suggest, if you will, that their denial might not be quote unquote as holistic as we would like for it to be. And you would hope that in a holistic process, there would be a much larger factor of more recent coursework taken. But in fact, the denied post-baccalaureate post-bac GPA is similar in range to the overall pool regarding the post-baccalaureate GPA. So something, I'm not entirely sure if it's not holistic in this sense, but one thing it does suggest is that undergraduate GPA does seem to play a factor in whether an applicant actually gets invited to interview. as shown by the last 3 slides. So you see the interviewed post-baccalaureate overall GPA is higher in their range, highlighted by the arrow, even though they already have a pretty high post-baccalaureate postbac GPA in and of itself. That's within the range of all the accepted applicants that are extended an offer for this particular pool. So this really shows some of the interesting sort of preferences that this application process expresses when it comes to post-baccalaureate applicants. And you can read a little bit more about other applicants in our 2 papers themselves. A comparison that we are able to do is looking at underrepresented minorities in our applicant pool and compare them with socioeconomically disadvantaged applicants in the pool. They are not necessarily the same group. So we are able to use this analysis to kind of look at the similarities in the metrics between those that are underrepresented minorities and those that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and do this interesting little crosshatch analysis over here. So what you wind up seeing that's really remarkable is that if you are an underrepresented minority, regardless of your socioeconomic status, you tend to have lower metrics overall as a cohort. In contrast, socioeconomically disadvantaged applicants as a cohort do not have that same type of dramatic difference in their metrics in this analysis. So you can kind of see how if the combinations of SED status or URM status or self-identity play a role, and you'll just see that URM status, regardless of socioeconomically disadvantaged status, tend to always have lower metrics in this analysis. And so that's something to kind of forewarn everybody that socioeconomically disadvantaged status is not necessarily in this analysis a proxy for diversity in and of itself, or it doesn't guarantee it. We can do that analysis and look at other interesting factors. And one of the things that did pop up where SED, socioeconomically disadvantaged applicants, and underrepresented minority applicants are very similar is the fact that the range of their total employment hours in the ADEA AADSAS application tends to be higher in general compared to traditional non-URM, non-socioeconomically disadvantaged applicants. So you'll see as highlighted by the arrows here that the mid-range actually tends to be a little bit more expansive, whether you see shifts in the median or you see shifts in the 75th percentile numbers in each of those groups. They all tend to be higher for both SED and URM applicants in our pool, as opposed to the next to last graph that you see. Those that are neither minorities nor disadvantaged tend to have slightly smaller, more contracted range of employment hours listed in the application. What's also intriguing is looking at the interviewed pool, that range is even smaller, that there seems to be an unintended preference for applicants in the interview pool to have smaller or much fewer experience in employment as expressed in their application. This has some very interesting considerations for those in holistic review because we do value distance traveled. And one of the metrics that can give us some insight into distance traveled is employment hours. And if our process is discounting that for whatever reason, we need to understand why that actually is the case in our process and find ways to perhaps mediate it. So I know most people are not looking at employment hours as a selection factor. And this is an argument to maybe consider other metrics that exist in applications to see if there are ways that we can identify candidates that truly are more diverse with regards to their life and journey and distance travel. So you can read more and see more data that we have crunched for you in the 2 articles that we published in the Journal of Dental Education in November of 2019 and in March of 2020. Personally, I am very grateful to Rutgers University and their institutional support for this project and to help me at least analyze these data for the Rutgers School of Dental Medicine Admissions Committee. Thank you very much. We hope that we can actually get a chance to discuss these findings and maybe spin off some other interesting research opportunities at a near conference that hopefully can be convened relatively soon. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in contact with any of us and we'd be glad to hear from you. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of this virtual conference.